The ashes of the sky. The skis above the shattered peaks of Varanth lay silent, as though the wind itself mourned. Once those skis had been alive. They had roared with the thunder of wings vast enough to eclipse the sun. Fire had traced brilliant paths across the heavens, painting dawn and dusk in molten gold and burning crimson. The mountains had sung beneath the passage of dragons, their ancient stones resonating with the rhythm of creatures older than empires, older than memory itself. But now the sky was a hollow thing. Ash drifted where light once danced. It fell in slow, ceaseless spirals, like the last breath of a dying world, settling upon jagged cliffs and broken spires, upon the bones of trees long since burned away, upon the ruins of a kingdom that had never been built by human hands. The wind did not howl as it once had, it whispered. It crept through the mountain passes with a soft, hollow voice, carrying with it the scent of char and loss. Even the storms that gathered in the distant horizon seemed to falter before reaching Varanth, as though the sky itself feared to disturb what lay broken beneath it. High above all of it, where the mountain pierced the heavens like a blade of black glass, lay the Dragon Queen. Elindra. She did not move. Her vast form lay curled upon the summit, her body encircling what remained of her nest, a hollow carved into the living stone, lined once with precious metals, polished bones, and the woven remnants of 1,000 hunts. It had been a place of warmth, of life, of beginnings. Now it was a grave. Her wings, once radiant with the brilliance of molten gold, lay half-furled at her sides. The membranes were torn in places, the edges ragged where blade and spell had found their mark. What light remained in her scales was dimmed, dulled beneath a fine layer of ash that clung to her like the weight of memory itself. Beneath her, scattered across the blackened stone, lay fragments. Shell, bone, flesh. They had once been her clutch. Her youngs, her future. Now they were nothing more than echoes. The pieces of shattered eggshell still glimmered faintly, catching what little light filtered through the ash-laden sky. Their surfaces were cracked and charred, their interiors hollow, lifeless. Some had been crushed outright, reduced to powder beneath careless boots. Others bore marks, clean, deliberate cuts where blades had split them open. Cruelty did not always need purpose. Sometimes it was enough that something beautiful existed. And so it was destroyed. Elindra's head rested low, her great horns carved from obsidian shadow casting long, unmoving silhouettes across the stone. Her eyes, vast and ancient, remained open, but they did not burn. Not anymore. They glowed faintly like embers long past their flame. Days had passed since the hunters came. Time to a dragon was a vast and shifting thing. Years slipped by like breaths. Centuries faded into memory like dreams half forgotten. But grief had a way of sharpening time, of dragging each moment into unbearable clarity. Elindra remembered everything. The moment she had left the mountains. The beat of her wings as she soared eastward, chasing the scent of storm and prey across distant lands. The exhilaration of flight, the taste of wind and lightning upon her tongue. She had hunted far that day, driven not by hunger but by instinct, the deep, ancient need to provide, to prepare, to ensure the survival of what lay waiting within her nest. Her youngs. She had thought of them even as she hunted. She had imagined their first breaths, their first cries, the fragile flicker of life that would soon fill the hollow of her mountain. She had imagined the day they would take to the sky, clumsy and unsteady, their wings too small, their fire too weak but growing. Always growing. She had imagined teaching them, guarding them, watching them become. It was a future she had seen countless times before, across ages uncounted. And yet this time had been different. This time she had allowed herself to hope. That had been her mistake. When she returned, the sky had already changed. It had been subtle at first. A shift in the wind. A silence where there should have been life. Even before she reached the mountain, Elindra had felt it. A wrongness, deep and unsettling, like a wound in the world itself. She had descended faster then, her wings beating with growing urgency, the air trembling beneath her passage. Clouds scattered in her wake. Lightning flickered along her scales, drawn by the rising storm within her. And then she saw it. Smoke. Not the rich, vibrant smoke of dragonfire, but something thinner, darker, something dead. The mountain had been burning. By the time she reached the summit, the flames had already begun to die. What remained was ruin. Her nest broken. The stone itself had been cracked, shattered by forces not meant for such heights. Black scorch marks scarred the ground, interwoven with lines of silver residue where magic had been unleashed. And everywhere, the smell, it hit her like a blade through the heart. Blood, burned flesh, death. She had landed with a force that split the mountain. Stone fractured beneath her claws. The remnants of her nest collapsed further under her weight. The air trembled with the force of her arrival, sending ash spiraling into the sky in great choking clouds. For a moment, just a moment, she had not understood. Her gaze had swept across the destruction, her mind struggling to make sense of what lay before her. The fragments, the ruin, the silence. Where were they? Where were her youngs? She moved then. Slowly at first, her vast body shifting with careful, almost hesitant motion. Her claws brushed against the shattered remains of the nest, pushing aside debris, uncovering what lay hidden beneath. And then she found them. Not wholes, not living, pieces, fragments, shells that would never hatch, lives that would never begin. The world had gone still. There had been no roars, no burst of flame, no fury unleashed upon the sky. Only silence, a silence so deep it swallowed everything. Elendra had lowered herself then, her body curling instinctively around the broken remnants of her clutch, as though her presence alone could restore what had been lost. It could not. Nothing could. The hunters had been thorough. They had come prepared. Knights clad in silver armor, their forms etched with runes of protection and purpose. Weapons forged not for war but for a singular task, to kill that which should not be killed. Dragon slayers. They had climbed her mountain while she was gone. They had known. Of course they had known. Humans always knew. They feared dragons, yes, but more than that they envied them. Their power, their longevity, their place in a world that humans believed should belong to them alone. And so they hunted. Not for survival, not for defense, but for dominance. The blades they carried were blessed, enchanted to pierce scales that no ordinary weapon could scratch. Their armor bore sigils to shield them from flame. Their courage was not their own. It was bolstered by prayers and promises by kings who would never set foot upon a dragon's mountain, yet demanded its conquest all the same. They had come in numbers. They had come with purpose. And they had found what they sought. Elendra could see it in the scars left behind. The deep gouges in the stone where claws had struck in desperation. The splintered remains of her nest, broken not by accident but by intent. The precise, deliberate destruction of each egg. No, this had not been a battle. It had been an execution. And she had not been there. That was the truth that cut the deepest. Not the loss, not the destruction, but the absence. She had not been there to protect them. The realization coiled within her, tightening, suffocating. She had failed. The Dragon Queen, the ancient, the eternal, the unchallenged ruler of the skis above Varanth, had failed to protect her own young. What was power then? What was eternity? What was fire if it could not preserve what mattered most? The questions lingered unanswered. And so she did the only thing left to her. She remained. Days passed. Then more. The sun rose and fell behind a veil of ash, its light dimmed, its warmth distant and hollow. The mountain grew colder, quieter. Even the creatures that had once thrived in its shadow, those that fed upon its heat, that basked in its presence, fled. They could feel it. The change. Grief in a dragon was not a simple thing. It was not tears. It was not cries. It was something deeper. Older. It seeped into the land itself, into stone and sky, into the very fabric of the world. It twisted the air, turned warmth to chill, light to shadow. It lingered in every breath, in every sound, in every absence. The rivers that flowed from Varanth slowed, their waters darkened by ash. The forest at its base grew still, their leaves turning brittle, their roots drawing back as though from unseen poison. Even the wind avoided the summit, skirting its edges, unwilling to touch what lay at its heart. For grief in a dragon was more dangerous than rage. Rage could burn. Rage could destroy. But grief endured. And in its endurance it changed everything. Elendra did not move. Not truly. At times her chest would rise and fall with slow, measured breaths, each exhale sending faint tendrils of smoke curling into the air. At times, her eyes would shift, their dim glow tracing the broken remains of her clutch as though searching for something that was no longer there. But she did not leave. She did not hunt. She did not sleep. She remained. The world in turn left her alone. Far below in the lands of men, whispers began to spread. Of the silent mountain. Of the dragon queen who did not strike back. Of the hunters who had climbed the peak and returned, some wounded, some broken but alive. Alive, they spoke of victory, of triumph, of a threat diminished. Songs were sung, tales were told, and none of them spoke of what had truly been lost. None of them spoke of the silence. None of them spoke of the grief. For humans understood many things. But not this. Not yet. And so the mountain remained as it was. Broken, silent, waiting for something or someone to change it. The boy who did not flee. It was on the seventh day that something changed. For 6 days the mountain had known nothing but silence. Not the peaceful silence of dawn before birdsong, nor the quiet hush of snowfall blanketing the world. This silence was heavier. It pressed down upon stone and sky alike, suffocating sound before it could be born. Even time seemed reluctant to pass. The sun rose dim behind a veil of ash and sank again without color. The wind skirted the mountain's edges, whispering rather than howling. No creature climbed the blackened slopes. No shadow crossed the summit. The world had learned. The Dragon Queen grieved. And grief in a being as old and powerful as Elendra was not something to be disturbed. Yet on the seventh day, there was movement. Far below the shattered peaks of Varanth, where the mountain's jagged cliffs gave way to broken ridges and narrow paths carved by time and erosion, a small figure began to climb. At first, it was little more than a flicker against the vastness of stone, a shift where there should have been none, a presence so fragile it seemed impossible it could exist within the weight of that place. But it persisted, step by step, breath by breath. A human's. The scent reached Elendra long before the shape resolved against the horizon. Her senses, dulled by grief, stirred. Faint at first, then sharper. Smoke curled from her nostrils as she drew in a slow breath, the air carrying with it something unfamiliar within the suffocating sameness of ash and ruin. Warmth, salt, life, humans. Her eyes opened. They did not blaze as they once had. They did not burn with fury or power. But they were vast, ancient, and aware. Molten amber shifted within shadow as her gaze fixed upon the distant movement. There, a speck upon the mountain's broken spine. Climbing, toward her, toward the grave of her youngs. For a long moment, Elendra did not move. She watched. It would have been easy to end him. A single breath, a flicker of flame carried upon the wind. He would never reach her, would never even understand what had claimed him. But she did nothing. Perhaps in another time she would have. Before, when anger had been easier to grasp than the hollow weight that now filled her chest. But now she only watched. The boy climbed. The path was no path at all, not anymore. Where once there had been narrow trails etched by centuries of movement, by dragons, by lesser creatures that dared follow in their wake, there was now only ruin. Stone had fractured beneath the force of battle. Sections of the mountain had collapsed entirely, leaving sheer drops where stable ground had once been. Ash coated everything, turning even solid rock into treacherous footing. And yet, he climbed. Slowly, carefully, each step placed with hesitation but not uncertainty. He slipped once. His foot lost purchase on loose stone, his body pitching forward as small rocks skittered down the slope beneath him. For a heartbeat, it seemed he would fall. He caught himself. Barely. Fingers grasping at a jagged outcrop, nails scraping against stone. He did not cry out. He did not look down. He pulled himself up. And continued. Elendra's gaze narrowed. Strange. Humans did not come here. Not alone. Not without purpose. The hunters had come in numbers. Armed. Prepared. Their fear masked by discipline, their intent sharpened by command. This one, This one carried neither armor nor weapon. Only himself. And something else. Even at a distance, Elendra could see it. Held close. Guarded. Her attention shifted. Focused. The boy climbed higher. Closer. The air grew thinner as he ascended, colder, sharper against his skin. The ash that drifted from the summit settled upon him, clinging to his hair, his cloak, his lashes. Each breath became more labored, his chest rising and falling with increasing effort. Still, he did not turn back. The sun dipped lower in the sky, its light fading into dull gray. Shadows stretched across the mountain, long and cold. And at last, he reached the summit. The space opened before him. A wide, shattered expanse of blackened stone, broken and scarred by forces beyond mortal understanding. At its center lay the hollow of the nest. And within it, Elendra. Even diminished by grief, she was vast. Her body filled the space, her form coiled protectively around what remained of her clutch. Her scales, though dulled, still held the faint echo of their former brilliance. Her wings stretched behind her like broken banners, their tattered edges stirring faintly in the still air. She was immovable, unyielding, ancient beyond comprehension. And she was watching him. The boy froze. For the first time since he began his climb, doubt found him. It struck hard. Sudden, real. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes lifted, slowly, almost against his will, until they met hers. The world seemed to shrink, to narrow. There was nothing beyond that gaze. No mountains, no sky, no path behind him. Only the dragon queens. Only the distance between them. And the certainty that it could vanish in an instant. Smoke curled from her nostrils, thin tendrils rising into the cold air. The ground beneath him felt fragile. Temporary. As though it could give way at any moment, sending him tumbling into the void below. He should run. Every instinct screamed it. Every story he had ever heard, every whispered warning, every tale told in fear around firelit nights. Run. Run and do not look back. But he did not. His hands tightened around what he carried. Carefully, protectively, and he took another step forward. The mountain trembled. It was subtle, barely more than a shift. But beneath Elendra's immense weight, even the smallest movement carried force. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her head. Stone cracked softly beneath her as her body adjusted, her massive form unfolding just enough to rise above him. Her shadow fell across the ground. Across him. Cold. Absolute. Leave. The word was not spoken. It did not pass through air. It did not echo from her jaws. It existed. Within the stone. Within the wind. Within him. It pressed against his mind, vast and unyielding, reverberating through bone and breath alike. A command. Ancient. Final. The boy faltered. His step stilled. For a heartbeat, it seemed he would obey. That fear would take him, that instinct would win. But then, he swallowed and shook his head. Not in defiance, not in challenge, but in quiet refusal. I didn't come to hurt you. His voice was small, fragile against the weight of her presence. It trembled despite him, despite everything. But it did not break. I know what happened. Elendra's gaze sharpened. The faint glow within her eyes flickered. Humans. They always claimed to know. They always believed they understood. They knew nothing. Nothing of her loss. Nothing of what had been taken. They were the cause of it. Flame stirred within her. Faint, but present. A flicker at the edges of her jaws, a soft glow that painted the ash in shifting light. A warning. One breath. That was all it would take. One breath and he would cease to exist. The boy saw it. Of course he did. How could he not? The heat touched his skin, subtle but unmistakable. His heart pounded. His body tensed. But he did not run. Instead, he stepped closer. Closer to the edge of the nest. Closer to her, closer to death. Elendra watched him. Curiosity stirred, faint and unfamiliar. Why? Why did he not flee? Why did he not beg? Why did he not fight? Humans always did one of those things. Always. But this one simply walked. And then, she saw what he carried. The world narrowed. Everything else fell away. The ash, the mountain, the sky, the past, all of it faded. Until there was only that. Held carefully in his arms. A shape, small, fragile, impossible. A dragon egg. Cracked, scorched, but whole. Time seemed to stop. Elendra did not breathe. Did not move. Did not think. For a moment she was no longer the Dragon Queen. No longer ancient. No longer grieving. She was only a mother. I found it. The boy's voice was softer now. Careful, as though afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile reality between them. They missed this one. Missed. The word echoed. Impossible. The hunters had not missed. They had been thorough, deliberate, cruel, and yet, there it was. Before her. Real. Whole. Alive. Was it? Hope rose. Sharp. Dangerous. A blade forged from longing and fear. Hope was crueler than despair. Despair was certain. Despair did not break. Hope could be taken. Hope could be destroyed. And she had already lost too much. Elendra remained still. Utterly, completely, as though movement alone might unravel what she saw. The boy stepped forward. Slowly, carefully, each step measured, deliberate. He did not rush, did not stumble, did not falter, until he stood at the edge of her nest, at the boundary between what was his world and what was hers. For a moment he hesitated, not in fear, but in understanding. He was close now, close enough to feel the heat of her breath, close enough to see the fractures in her scales, the ash that clung to her, the dimness in eyes that should have burned like suns. Close enough to understand what she had lost. Gently, he knelt. The motion was slow, careful, reverent. He lowered the egg to the ground between them, placing it upon the blackened stone with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what he held. I thought. He swallowed. His voice caught, then steadied. Maybe you should have it. Silence stretched. Long, unbroken. The wind did not stir. The ash did not fall. Even the world seemed to wait. Elendra looked at the egg. She did not reach for it, did not move toward it. She simply looked, as though committing every detail to memory before it could vanish. And then, slowly, so slowly that the mountain itself seemed to hold its breath, she moved, her head lowered, massive, ancient, yet impossibly gentle. The distance between them closed. The boy did not move, did not flinch, did not step back. He remained where he was, still, silent, as her presence filled everything. Her breath reached the egg. Warm, soft, a whisper of heat against its cracked surface. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, she felt it. Faint, so faint it might have been imagined. A flicker, a pulse. Life, weak, fragile, but alive. Elendra froze. The world shattered around that single realization. Alive, not lost, not gone, not all of them. A sound rose within her. Not a roar, not fire, something else, something deeper, older, a tremor of emotion too vast for destruction. Her eyes burned, brighter now, not with fury, but with something dangerously close to hope. And for the first time in days, The Dragon Queen did not feel empty. She felt everything. And the boy, the small, fragile, impossible human, remained kneeling before her, unburned, unbroken, unfleeing, the flame that returned. The change was subtle at first. So subtle that, had anyone stood at the foot of Varinth and looked upward, they might not have noticed it at all. The skis above the shattered peaks were still veiled in ash. The sun still struggled to pierce the heavy shroud that lingered over the mountain, its light dim and colorless as it drifted across the broken world below. And yet, something was different. The gray was no longer absolute. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when light touched the highest stones not as a dying glow, but as something warmer, something that lingered just a heartbeat longer than before. The wind, too, began to change. Where once it had avoided the summit entirely, skirting the mountain as though afraid to disturb the grief that lay coiled upon its peak, now it dared to return, tentative, uncertain. It crept across the blackened stone in soft breaths, stirring ash into slow spirals that no longer felt entirely lifeless. Even silence itself seemed altered. Not gone, but no longer suffocating. No longer endless. For at the heart of Varinth something still lived. Elendra remained where she had been. She did not leave the nest. She did not hunt. She did not stray even a single step beyond the circle of broken stone that had once held her future. Her vast form curled protectively around the egg, her wings drawn close, forming a barrier against the cold winds that swept across the summit. Her body, though wounded and wearied, became a shield, unyielding, immovable. Time passed. Days slipped into one another, indistinct and quiet. The sun rose and fell. The ash drifted. And still Elendra remained. But she was no longer alone. The boy stayed. At first it seemed impossible. Humans did not linger where death waited. They did not remain within reach of a dragon, especially one whose grief had already scarred the land itself. Yet he did. He did not ask permission. He did not seek acknowledgement. He simply remained. He moved carefully within the edges of her domain, never stepping too close without reason, never intruding upon the space she had claimed around the egg. His presence was small, insignificant against the vastness of the mountain, but it was steady. Unchanging. He gathered what little the mountain offered. There was not much. Varinth had never been a place of abundance, even before the hunters came. Now it was harsher still. The plants that clung to the lower slopes were sparse and bitter, their leaves grayed by ash. Small creatures once drawn to the warmth of the dragon's presence had fled, leaving behind only the occasional scavenger that moved cautiously through the ruins. The boy learned quickly. He climbed lower when he needed to, careful to return before darkness fell. He gathered roots that still held life, caught what small creatures he could, and scavenged what remnants the hunters had left behind, broken packs, discarded supplies, anything that might be used. He built small fires. Carefully, always at a distance. The flames were nothing like Elendra's, small, flickering, fragile, but they pushed back the cold, gave him warmth enough to endure. And he spoke. At first, it was little more than sound. Soft words, barely more than whispers, carried into the vast silence. He spoke to himself. Or perhaps, to her. Elendra did not respond. Not at first. Humans were fleeting things. Their lives burned bright and brief, like sparks cast from a greater flame. They came and went, leaving little behind but the marks of their passing. She had seen countless generations rise and fall. Watched kingdoms grow and crumble into dust. What was one human boy against the weight of eternity? Nothing. And yet, he remained. Days passed. Then more. He did not leave. He did not falter. He did not try to claim what was not his. He simply stayed. And slowly, Elendra began to listen. It was not a decision. Not a choice. It simply happened. The sound of his voice, once insignificant, began to settle into the silence rather than disturb it. It became part of the mountain's rhythm, as constant as the drifting ash, as steady as the rise and fall of her own breath. He spoke of the world below. Of villages nestled in valleys where the land was still green, where rivers ran clear and untainted. He spoke of narrow streets and crowded markets, of laughter that echoed between stone walls, of nights lit by lanterns rather than flame. He spoke of hunger, of cold winters and failed harvests, of fear, always fear. People are afraid of you, he said once, his voice quiet as he sat beside his small fire staring into the embers. They've always been. Elendra did not move. Her gaze remained fixed upon the egg, her breath slow and measured. They tell stories, the boy continued, about dragons. His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Most of them aren't kind. The fire crackled softly. Ash drifted through the air. They say dragons burn villages, that they take what they want, that they destroy anything that gets too close. He paused. Then softer. They say dragons are monsters. The word lingered. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Elendra exhaled. A low, rumbling breath that stirred the ash around her, sending it into soft, spiraling currents. The boy glanced toward her, watching the movement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, you don't seem like a monster. His voice was steady. Certain. Elendra did not respond. But something shifted. Deep within her, where grief had hollowed out everything else, something stirred. Not anger. Not pains. Something quieter. Something uncertain. No, she thought. Not anymore. Time passed. And with it, something else began to change. The egg. At first, it was nothing. A subtle warmth. A faint pulse beneath the shell. But Elendra felt it. She felt everything. Every flicker of life. Every shift. Every fragile moment of growth. She did not leave its side. Not once. Her world had narrowed to that single, fragile shape. The boy noticed. Of course he did. He watched the way her head would lower, the way her breath would slow, the way her entire being seemed to focus upon the egg as though nothing else existed. He stopped climbing as far. Stopped leaving for as long. He stayed closer. Watched. Waited. Days turned into something more. Not just time, but anticipation. And then, it happened. Dawn came quietly. The sky was pale, the ash thinner than it had been in days. Light filtered through in soft beams, touching the mountain in faint gold. For the first time, the summit did not feel entirely lifeless. Elendra was still. Completely. Utterly. Her attention fixed upon the egg. The boy slept nearby, wrapped in his cloak, his breathing slow and even. The world held its breath. And then, a sound. Small. So small it might have gone unnoticed by any lesser being. A faint crack. Elendra froze. Her entire body stilled. Her breath halted. For a moment there was nothing. And then, again, a sharper sound. The shell shifted. A thin line spread across its surface, faint but unmistakable. Cracking. Breaking. Elendra moved. Not with forces. Not with powers. But with a careful, trembling precision that seemed impossible for a creature of her size. She leaned closer. Closer. Her breath warmed the shell, curling around it in soft tendrils of heat. The boy stirred. His eyes opened, blinking against the dim light. For a moment, he did not understand. Then he saw. And he was awake. Fully. Instantly. The crack widened. The shell split. A small piece broke away, falling to the stone with a soft, hollow sound. Silence followed. A heartbeat. Two. And then, movement. A tiny shape pushed against the opening. Weak. Unsteady. But determined. A head emerged. Small. Fragile. Covered in scales that shimmered faintly in the morning light, silver blue, like starlight caught upon ice. Eyes blinked open. Bright. Alive. The hatchling inhaled. And let out a small, trembling chirp. It was not a roar. Not fire. Not power. It was life. Elendra made a sound. It rose from deep within her, unbidden, uncontrollable. Not a roar. Not a cry. Something else. Something ancient. A sound that carried sorrow and joy in equal measure, that spoke of loss and return, of endings and beginnings. The mountain felt it. The sky carried it. The world shifted. The boy laughed. The sound was bright. Warm. Humans. It broke through the heaviness of the mountain like sunlight through storm clouds. It worked, he said, his voice filled with something close to wonder. Elendra did not look at him. Not yet. Her gaze remained fixed upon the hatchling as it struggled free of the shell, its movements clumsy, its wings small and untested. It stumbled, fell, righted itself, and chirped again. Alive, her hatchling, the last of her clutch, the last piece of what had been taken. Alive, slowly, Elendra turned her head. Her gaze found the boy, and for the first time, she truly saw him, not as a human, not as a threat, not as one of those who had taken everything from her, but as something else, something rare, something different. You stayed. The words echoed softly, no longer a command, no longer a force. A statement. The boy shrugged. Simple, uncomplicated. Someone had to. Elendra studied him. This small, fragile being who had climbed a mountain of death and remained where none should have. Who had brought life back into a place where only grief had lived. Who had given, without asking, without demanding, without fear. Slowly, she lowered her head. Closer, closer still, until her vast eye was level with him. You gave life. Her voice was softer now. Not in volumes, but in weights, in meanings, where your kind brought deaths. The wind stirred, stronger now, carrying her words across the mountain, down its slopes into the world below. I will remember that. And in that moment, something changed. Not just on the mountains, not just within Elendra, but beyond. Far below in the lands of men, whispers still spoke of dragons, of fire, of destruction, of monsters in the sky. But stories change. Slowly, over time, and this one would grow. Of a lone boy who climbed a mountain of ash. Of a dragon queen who chose not to burn. Of a life returned where all had been lost. And in those stories, humanity was not the villains, not the destroyer, but the one who stayed, the one who brought hope. And above Varinth, for the first time since the mountain had fallen silent, a thin trail of smoke rose into the sky. Not of destruction, but of fire returned.